Hi everyone, welcome to the PPMA webinar today. I think we're just waiting on one or two more people to join, so we're just going to give it another few seconds. I guess just while we're waiting for people to join, my name is Eugene Mullen. I'm a senior national account manager with Indeed, working with the public sector. We were very, very lucky to be the sponsors of this award for the London Borough of Hounslow. So I'm going to introduce not Stephen Walker Whitehead, but we have the lovely Alison Ford joining from Hounslow today to talk through the resolution framework that they introduced and they won an award for at the PPMA conference earlier this year.
Oh, thanks, Eugene. Yes, I'm Alison Ford, and I'm standing in for Steve, who is really sorry not to be here, but he's not well at all. I spoke to him this morning. He sounded absolutely terrible. So because I've been involved in developing the framework pretty much from the beginning, not quite, then and I've run this session for in other places. I said I'd step in, so I hope that's okay. And some of you may have heard about our framework before, but we were really chuffed. I must say, really chuffed to win this award. And this is just really us showing, just telling you about how we've introduced a different way of managing conflict in the organisation. But please ask questions. We're very happy in Hounslow to follow up with anyone who's interested in bringing in an approach like this, which we found has been really successful. Not without its challenges, though, of course. So why did we do it? And the main reason why, and again, you may have heard about Hounslows values. We're really proud of our values. They were developed pre-pandemic in 2019 and really led by our chief exec at the time and Steve to say what sort of organisation do we really want to be. And to develop these, we engaged everyone in a sort of ground up conversation. And we did actually get about 90% of people engaged in developing these, which were refined and tested. And they do attract people to come and work for us, actually, because we do try, it doesn't always work in all cases, to live these values. So they are very much incorporated into how we work at Hounslow. And clearly some of our policies and approaches really didn't fit with Steve's vision, which is about putting humanity back into the workplace. And that sounds, it's a really big ambition, but it was something he came to Hounslow he really wanted to do. So our development of the resolution framework is part of our journey, really, to make sure that we do reflect these values in everything we do. And there's other work going on. And I think the first thing that Steve asked us to do was to look at all our HR policies and to make them much more human and not so rigid, and to make sure our policies were a way of treating people with compassion and kindness and care. And of course, immediately realised really that our discipline and grievance procedures just didn't fit with the kind of organisation we wanted to be. So this, and you think this would be quite easy really to introduce something like this, and I'm sure if you're HR OD practitioners, you will also know that discipline and grievance often doesn't work in an ideal way. So we know in organisations that there's conflict because we're public service, public servants, and we're often passionate about what we do. But we knew with our discipline, I mean, the very names, actually, when I say them now, just seem at odds with what we're trying to do. But our existing processes just didn't deliver. And there was a huge cost emotionally and financially. And actually, our cases weren't high. I think we had about 30 a year at the time that were going to tribunal. But the cost in terms of time to the organisation was significant. And I don't know about you and your experience of grievance, but we knew that mostly our grievance process just didn't work for people. In fact, what usually happened with grievance and discipline was that it pushed people apart rather than bringing them together and resolving things in the best way that was, for everyone involved. And we know that how people feel at work really matters. And I mean, I know as HR and OD professionals will know this more than most people, it really matters. It matters to organizational outcomes, and it matters to the culture of the organization. Uh, so that was our reason, and there was a lot of work. There were focus groups to find out how was this actually working in practice, and the news wasn't terribly good. And just from my own experience, I know it just wasn't working properly. It wasn't working how we wanted it to for people. So thinking about the organisation we wanted to be, we thought about, well, what did we want? And we really want to work somewhere where we can talk openly, early, and honestly about the difficulties we face, the issues and conflicts that arise as part of everyday work, and to support people in resolving them. So our ideal, and this is a long-term objective, is that we don't need a resolution framework, that these conversations will take place over a coffee and a muffin, which became sort of thing that we said, would be our ideal, that we don't need this process in people business partnering, that managers and teams just get together and do this naturally. But our resolution hub, as it's called, supports people to resolve conflict if that's not possible for them to do themselves. And it focuses on restorative, sustainable approaches. So we don't want this to be a sticking plaster. We really want to get underneath what's causing the issue or the conflict and bring that out into the open so people can talk about that in a respectful way that puts the person at the center of it. And I think, and getting away from this idea that our processes are about somebody winning and somebody losing, but really coming to a win-win solution for everyone involved. And it takes work and it takes time, and isn't always successful. But I think it's so important that we do this, and in our profession, treating people with dignity, respect, really listening to what people are saying is so important. We still have our formal processes where they're needed, and I'll say a bit about that in a minute. And we did say from the beginning that we wanted to learn and adapt from this as it went in, and we have done. We've learned a lot. And to bring in the framework itself, we worked with a company called TCM, and the chief exec, David Little, who some of you may be familiar with, who's done an awful lot of work on restorative approaches, and they were a huge help to us in implementing this. So the big thing, I suppose, and I'm sure the question we're asking is, well, how did you go about it? Because it's not an easy thing to do, because we were wedded to our, grievance and disciplinary processes. So there was a lot of background work, and it took an awful lot of listening and an awful lot of conversations to bring this in. And we actually introduced it in May last year, but with a very soft launch. So we did a lot of training. Especially with our colleagues in people business partnering, as we call HR, because although they were trying to do things differently, there was no sort of process for that. So, and we weren't recording our cases either. So we really wanted to get a handle on what was going on in the organization. We trained mediators, they're internal mediators, who have been absolutely fantastic. So the training was brilliant. They are qualified mediators, and they have come in to mediate. They work in pairs, but certainly the work they've done has been quite incredible. And our investigators are also trained in this approach. So whether something's being managed formally or informally, we still apply the same values and approach so that everyone is treated with respect and really listened to. So I suppose our engagement was one of the challenges, and I wasn't here for all of it. It was a colleague of mine who got involved in most of this, and I think there were some real challenges, like people saying, "Well, what why change it? What's the point of changing it?" So and the trades unions, I remember Steve saying to me that he went into a meeting with them and they were very resistant because they felt that their role was being undermined because they had a clear role in the process we have. And actually, David Little said at the time, what they need is a really good listening to. And that's really, I think, how this was approached at the time, was really listening to people's concerns. And actually, the trade unions are part of the governance structure. So they work with us to make sure that this framework is working properly for everyone in the organization. Leadership teams. I think our top team, there was some concerns about there not being the possibility of somebody being able to raise a grievance. Of course, they can raise a grievance, but it just isn't called a grievance. It's called a request for resolution. The equality network groups who were heavily involved in this and were supportive of the approach. Our legal team couldn't really see the point of it, couldn't see the point of changing some of the language around this, but they were absolutely supportive of it being legally compliant. So there were no problems there. But I think the most amazing thing for me, because I did quite a lot of the briefing sessions for managers and colleagues, was that overwhelmingly they were supportive of this. They didn't want to carry on with the old system of grievance and discipline. We also knew, and this is worth mentioning, that from the data we did have, which was incomplete, that we had a feeling that people from our equality groups were perhaps being unfairly treated in some of our processes, and we really wanted to get underneath that as well and get some data.
Experiencing conflict at work
Our
is never
video.
easy. It makes us uncomfortable, unhappy, and unproductive. But when people with different passions and priorities under different pressures work together, we won't always agree. Conflicts are inevitable. We might upset each other or behave in ways that are out of step with our standards. We're human. We've been thinking about the kind of organisation we want to be. We know that, all too often, our grievance and disciplinary procedures don't deliver the kind of resolutions we would all hope for. We felt the tension this can cause, and we heard you when you said you wanted things to change. So we're changing our disciplinary and grievance procedures and launching a new resolution framework, as we believe there's a better, more human way to resolve conflict. One that allows us to grow and learn as individuals and as teams, and helps us to feel happier and more supported as we do. A framework that helps us to change our behaviours, that can change how we feel at work, that reminds us of the standards we all need to achieve, instead of warning us when we miss the mark, and has our values at its heart. By talking to each other openly and honestly, we can nip issues in the bud, preventing misunderstandings and clearing the air before tensions mount. From simple coaching to full mediation, our resolution framework will help us to navigate difficult conversations. And, of course, in most serious situations, we will continue to follow a robust formal procedure to uphold our high standards. How we behave at work and how we feel at work matters. And with the support of our new resolution framework, we can all find better ways to work together and serve our residents. For more information, go to our resolution framework intranet pages.
So what I should have said then is this is the video that we used to introduce the framework. So I'm sorry about that, just went straight into it. But it really seems to sort of encapsulate what we were trying to do here. And really was very well received by our colleagues and managers, saying, yeah, almost like, yes, it's obvious we should have an approach like this rather than carry on with our old procedures. So how it actually works in a nutshell is this, that we have a request for resolution form. Anyone can complete it. We started this with the aim of encouraging people to make a request. We really don't want our people to suffer in silence at work. And we know it does happen, and that things build up over time and people don't feel they can raise them. So we want people to raise a request so we can track it for a start, and so we can try and resolve it, work with them to resolve it. It's triaged and scored, so it goes through a process within 2 working days, and then is referred to a resolution business partner. And they are trained in restorative justice approaches. So they will then decide, they will contact the person, decide with them what the best solution might be. In early resolution, that could be a coaching conversation with the person who's made the request. And it might be that that's all that's needed. So having talked it through, they may feel able to approach the other person involved in the issue themselves and have a conversation. Or it might be that they want somebody there to support them. And in that case, we would they will run a facilitated conversation. So it's like a mini mediation in a way, but it doesn't take us much time. And it's often used for issues that they're not long-standing, they've just arisen, and can be perhaps fairly easily resolved. Mediation is used when things are a lot more sort of deep-rooted or entrenched or have gone on for a long period of time. And again, that seems, these approaches have been extremely successful. We still have a formal resolution route, and that follows our usual formal processes. But what we ask everyone involved to do is to conduct this in a way that puts people at the centre of it, and is respectful, is listening, and everyone is treated with compassion. So, excuse me, I'm not going to go through all this, but I did want to point out, because we used this when we introduced it, to say, there's sort of reassurance that a lot of things are the same, that there's still gross misconduct happens. We can still dismiss people. There is a formal process. We will follow it when we need to follow it. And often triage scoring is quite clear that, something needs to go to formal processes and be investigated. And that still happens. The process is legally compliant. But what's different is that the conversations are given priority. So really listening to people and trying to understand what's happened from their point of view. And I know it's not always easy because people have different perceptions of what's gone on. But that is perhaps the big skill in this, is really trying to understand what's happened from people's own point of view. And also, I think for me, there's something about often when these things happen, somebody blames somebody else. And I think that's what we're really trying to get away from is if I put myself in this position, is me learning from this experience and thinking about what is my part in it. It's really difficult. It's not easy, but perhaps that's the only way we can really get a win-win outcome. So it seeks to restore rather than punish people. We want it to happen as early as possible so these things don't go on for ages and fester. So the triaging means that we do get consistency in the decision making at that point. It might change, and I'll show you that. We use reminders rather than warnings. I mean, when we think about it, why are we using warning? Where hearings are replaced by meetings. We don't use sanctions. So the language has changed around it, and that was something that legal were. Why would you want to change the language? But we really do think that's important, because it signals a change in our approach. And we do have a governance structure where we all work together to make sure that this continues to work in the best way possible for everyone. So this is some of our casework. This is our latest casework. So that's one of the big big advantages of doing this is we can track things, because before a lot of things were resolved, probably resolved by our people business partners, but we didn't know, and we couldn't track what was happening across. So this is so helpful to us to know. We can identify hotspots. We can identify where issues center around a particular service or manager or individual, and we can work with them separately. These are the number of cases we've had so far. It's not massive, but you can see that when we started this, there was a peak, and a lot of those cases actually went to mediation because they were historical. So that was something that was really great about this, that those people who had perhaps been sitting in silence could come forward and feel that this was going to be dealt with in a fair way. We're pretty slightly more cases raised by a manager. These are things we keep an eye on all the time to see what sort of cases are coming through, who's raising it, and in terms of our directorates, is it pretty even? Are there, is it disproportionate in some ways? And so it's something we can follow up and track. And something I'm so pleased about, because we didn't have this data before, and now we have got it. And the outcomes, you can see that, well, you probably need more time to look at it, but about 2/3 of cases are resolved through early resolution, which is great. And, that takes a lot of a real change of sort of how we approach things. And we would lean towards trying to resolve things informally unless we have to take a formal route. And you'll see that the triage outcomes, that's the outcomes from the scoring at the top, are sometimes changed, because when the resolution business partner speaks to the people involved, then of course they get a lot more information, and they get new evidence, more information. Or somebody says, I really don't want to go down that route. I'm adamant, I want this dealt with in a certain way. And then we've got the final outcome breakdown. And also the other thing that we're tracking really closely and trying to change is the number of days it takes to close cases. And I don't know in your organisations whether that's an issue, but it has always been a problem. And we're really trying to sort of tackle that. But it's quite difficult because of the pressures on people, and also because often, the people are absent and we can't arrange meetings as fast as we would like to. We also have an EDI breakdown, which is really important to us to see, well, is this being applied fairly across the organisation? Are there hotspots where we think that people are being discriminated against, and we need to know that, so we can do something about it. So the ethnicity breakdown has, and to a certain extent is still worrying us. So 50% of people who completed a request for resolution and declared their ethnicity are from a global majority ethnic group. And 60% of people from those groups had a resolution where they were mentioned. So, a case against them, if you like. So we did take a deep dive into that, because what we suspected was, is this white managers actually having conflict or having issues with people from minority groups? But actually the data doesn't tell us that. So the data tells us something a bit different from that there's a mix of managers who form that 60%. So we can't actually really get underneath what might be happening there, but there's clearly, it's something we really keep an eye on. And equally with disability, and again, those numbers look high, but when we investigated this a bit, only one of the requests for resolution was directly to do with the issue of the person having a disability. The issue was raised because of that. But the numbers are very small. So again, it's something that we keep tracking. Our gender is pretty well aligned. But, you know, very happy to answer questions on this, but it is something we watch all the time. And then evaluations, and this is showing us at our best. So these are, you know, these are the good things, and not to say that we don't have negative comments. We do try and evaluate everything, whether it's gone to informal or formal. And what we're interested in is how people have felt about the process, not necessarily about the outcome. And that can be quite difficult, but these are results which actually speak for themselves. I think the biggest challenge we have is getting the evaluations back. But, you know, we really want to learn as we go along. And then feedback, I just leave this for you to read. But it really has made a difference to where we've had, you know, people have found this successful, and this is what they've said about it, that generally it's working. Not saying it works in every case, and I'm not saying there aren't challenges with it, but generally, we think this is a really positive approach. And that's it from me. So I don't know whether there are any questions, or whether you've got any questions, Eugene, but happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thanks so much for going through that, Alison. There are some questions in the chat. The first one is from Philip. Philip was asking, do you have a case management system?
We do have a case management system, Philip. Yes, I'm afraid it's on a spreadsheet at the moment. We're hoping that we might be able to improve that in the future. But yes, we do track on a case management system, and that's the way we can link up cases, track how many days they've taken, and what requests have come in, where, when, and who they've gone to. So yes, we do.
Okay, great. Marina has asked a question, how do the percentages relate to the numbers in the workforce? How do percentages relate to numbers in the workforce? It might have been, I think it's maybe a slide or two back.
I think it's on the slide, yes. 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 On the EDI data, it's there. Sorry.
I just come in there. Sorry.
Yes, please. Please do.
It was just in relation to, you know, you're saying I think 50% of people who completed a form declared they were from a global ethnic majority. 60% of people who raised cases were from global ethnic majorities. But how many, you know, what's your proportion of global ethnic majority in your workforce?
Well, yeah, workforce breakdown is 52% global majority, 48% white. So there is a discrepancy here, which we did investigate, because why would 60% of people from, I mean, we call it global majority, from minority ethnic groups, have cases raised against them, which is usually by a manager, not always, but often. So we did look at that, Marina, but we can't find a pattern. So the assumption we had was, this white managers, but it isn't. It's really mixed. In fact, the majority of the people who had raised the cases weren't white. So we still, I mean, if anybody else has got any ideas, I mean, obviously we're all part of a culture. So, you know, just because we belong to a particular group doesn't mean we hold different views. So it is a bit perplexing. We would have expected it to be more in line with our workforce data. Does that help at all? Marina, I think you're on mute.
Hi, yes, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question.
Awesome. There's a couple more questions coming in. So we've got one question from Dawn. What methods did you use to obtain the feedback?
Oh, for the evaluations, well, it is anonymous, unfortunately, unless somebody wants to give their name. But after the resolution business partner will send an evaluation form, Microsoft form, to the parties involved and ask for their feedback. So that's how we got it. And then to get verbal feedback, sometimes it's on the form, sometimes it isn't. But if somebody's been prepared to give their name, which they can, because we want to follow up. If somebody's evaluation saying, well, I wasn't happy with this at all, we would like to be able to follow up and get their feedback. So where they've given their name, we've been able to do that, to actually get quotes. Does that answer the question?
So.
Yes, it's hard work getting the feedback, I have to say.
Good stuff. And then there's a second question from Dawn. How much time/resource is involved in the early resolution process? I'm presuming this outweighs the time spent on supporting the formal process. Sorry if I've missed this.
Well, it's an interesting question. No, that is an interesting question. And unfortunately, because we didn't have tangible information before we brought this in, we can't really compare. And it so much depends on the case. But certainly, yeah, we can't really, it's difficult. It's difficult. I haven't really got an answer to that. I mean, I hope we will have an answer. Our senses, but this isn't good enough, is it? Because I think more people have come forward. This is the thing. This is what makes it a bit difficult to measure in a way, because so many more, we suspect, people have come forward because they haven't had to put in a grievance. They make a request for resolution, which even sounds different, doesn't it? That you know, somebody wants to get something sorted out rather than saying, I want somebody else punished. And so I haven't really got that information. I haven't got a cost-benefit analysis on it. But our sense is that we are preventing things from escalating if we can encourage people to raise them early. Don't know whether that helps. It isn't a very good answer, is it?
It's fine, thank you.
Thank you, Dawn.
There's a few more questions coming in now as well. We've got questions from Krupa. How did you select the managers to attend mediation training to support the resolution framework?
Oh gosh, yes, my colleague was involved in this, and we actually went out for volunteers, and they had to make a written statement, and then there were interviews actually, so they were selected, and we will have a copy of the criteria. I wasn't in Hounslow at that point. I worked away from Hounslow for a couple of years, and so that happened when I wasn't there, but there was a selection process because we had to be really sure, as sure as we could be, that it's difficult, isn't it? That I think whoever was going to be a mediator had to really embrace this approach. And that's not always easy, depending on people's past experiences and what they're used to. So we felt we got a group of 12 mediators in the end who were really, so it was more on sort of attitude and approach rather than skills, because the skills can be learned. So, but we did have a process.
Okay, good stuff. And there's a second question in from group as well. Are employees able to pull out of the informal at any time and move to formal resolution?
Well, yes. Well, I suppose yes is the answer, because this is about individual choice. So ultimately, people decide, and there have been cases when somebody said, no, absolutely, I want this to go formal. So we will do that, but there would be a lot of work in before that, because if the resolution partner thinks there is a way forward that doesn't involve taking it to formal processes, and this will be explained what is involved if it goes to formal processes, is that going to be the best way of resolving it? And clearly, you know, there are occasions where it has to, and we have had people who've insisted that it goes to formal processes, and of course we will do that, because we do have to put people at the heart of this.
Okay, great. We have a question in from Claudia. Claudia says, I think you mentioned 90% of engagement in the early stages of development.
Oh.
How did How did you achieve this level of participation, particularly with frontline colleagues?
Oh, right. Okay, that's a really good question. But that goes back, actually, that was what we did to develop our values in the first place. So that was where the 90% engagement, and that was a huge program at the time. That was in 2019. And that was a ground up approach to developing our values. And yeah, we did do that, but it involved an awful lot of work, and you can imagine. But we did manage to get it out to the front line. We used a range of, we used a range of methods. We used World Cafe, focus groups, empty belly posters, postcards, survey. We had champions, we had a leadership group. So there are an awful lot of people involved in that. It was a big piece of work. And then before really Steve had this vision of once the values were in place, then we followed that with all these other changes. But unfortunately then COVID struck. So although we did really use the values during COVID, we couldn't really progress any other work on this until we'd recovered a bit from the pandemic. So, but in this, I suppose key people were involved, and clearly pockets of people, focus groups, but nothing like 90% that we managed to reach for when the values were actually created.
Okay, great. There's no other questions in the chat at the moment. I do have a question myself. I did find it really, really interesting because obviously I got to look at some of the presentation and some of the information beforehand. I'm curious to know, now that you have the framework up and running, what's the next step for it? Are you planning on making some tweaks based on the feedback you're getting, or how are you going to use the data that you are collecting kind of moving forward?
Oh, no, thanks, Eugene. No, good questions. Well, in terms of how we're developing it, we are still learning, and there have been some changes to the triage process actually since we brought it in. So we've really learned. But the latest thing we've done is there was a feeling that, and I suppose this was really in people business partnering, that this was very sort of centered in there, and we needed to perhaps have more of a sort of organizational responsibility for this framework and for our approach. So we asked for volunteers for resolution champions and people who are really sort of convinced by this new way of looking at conflict and resolving conflict and issues. And we've got 8 champions now from across the organization in different services who people can go to, because often, I mean, I don't think making a request for resolution is as bad as putting in a grievance, but it still is difficult to do. And so they can go to somebody in the organization in confidence, and they will help them complete it or talk them through the process. And that's something that is being used. So, again, it's going back to that plea, come forward, please tell us, because otherwise we don't know. And hotspots in the organization, if we do, and we do identify it, and certainly we identify it from casework, that yes, we will look at, well, okay, is there a hotspot here? Why is that happening? Does there need to be a different sort of intervention? And often that involves senior people as well, but we won't break confidentiality. So, we really have to think carefully about how we do that. But definitely it's helped us to identify where there are issues across the organization.
Okay, great. There's no other questions in the chat. I don't know if there's any last minute people that want to jump off mute and fire in a last minute question. Cool.
I'd just like to say thanks ever so much for listening. And as I said to Eugene, if anybody wants to talk about the framework in more detail, because this is really a sort of overview, we're more than happy, very happy to talk to anyone else about how we've done it and how, they want to introduce it. I'd really recommend it.
Yeah, no, definitely. It sounds like it's having a massive massive increase in the or help with the organization already. So it's great to see. But look, everyone, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for jumping on. I believe this will be shared out in the next week or so. But again, if similar to what Alison's saying, if anyone has any questions or wants to find out more about employer branding or job performance on Indeed or Glassdoor, please reach out to myself. And as Alison said, she's very keen to talk to anybody that's more interested in the resolution framework. But listen, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for your time. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks so much.